The final boarding call for Trans-American Flight 82 to San Francisco echoed through the polished corridors of JFK's Terminal 4, a promise of blue skies and new beginnings. For Dr. Genevieve Sterling, founder and CEO of Ethereum Dynamics, it was a routine flight, another step in building her billion-dollar aerospace empire. But inside the cockpit of the Boeing 777, Captain Richard Thorne had already made a decision. Staring at the passenger manifest, his eyes fixed on her name, he nursed a silent, ugly prejudice that was about to ground more than just the aircraft. He had the uniform, the authority, the wings. She had the truth. In the battle for the cockpit, only one could win, and the fallout would shatter a career built over 3 decades in a matter of hours. The air in the first-class cabin was a familiar symphony of quiet competence. The gentle click of a briefcase latch, the soft rustle of a newspaper, the low, reassuring hum of the auxiliary power unit. Dr. Genevieve Sterling settled into seat 2A, the plush leather a stark contrast to the sterile clean rooms and bustling factory floors where she spent most of her days. At 42, she commanded a presence that was earned, not given. Her company, Ethereum Dynamics, was a titan in the private space launch industry, a direct competitor to the likes of SpaceX and Blue Origin. Her mind was already 3,000 miles away, mentally rehearsing the critical presentation she was due to give to a consortium of Silicon Valley investors. She nodded politely to the lead flight attendant, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Brenda, as she accepted a glass of water. Everything was perfectly on schedule. The jet bridge had retracted, the cabin doors were armed, and the soft chime indicated the crew was preparing for pushback. In the cockpit, a different kind of atmosphere had settled. First Officer Samuel Peterson, a bright and eager pilot in his early 30s, was running through the final pre-flight checklist. He was thrilled to be flying with Captain Richard Thorne, a legend in the airline with over 30 years of experience. Thorne was old school, a pilot's pilot who had flown everything from DC-10s to the modern 777. "Checklist complete, Captain," Sam announced, his voice crisp. Thorne didn't respond immediately. He was staring at the tablet mounted to his yoke, specifically at the load sheet. He grunted, a low, guttural sound of disapproval. "Something's not right, Sam." Sam leaned over. "What is it, Rick? All numbers are in the green. Center of gravity is well within limits." "It's the cargo," Thorne said, his voice a low growl. "They've loaded a heavy pallet of electronics in the forward hold. It's throwing off my numbers. I don't like it. It feels heavy in the nose." Sam frowned, scrolling through his own tablet. "The manifest says it's 1,200 pounds. The system has already compensated for it in the trim settings. We're perfectly balanced, sir. We've flown with much heavier forward cargo." "The system," Thorne scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "I fly the plane, not the computer. I've got a feel for it. And I'm telling you, this feels wrong. I'm not comfortable taking off with this configuration." The accusation hung in the air, a direct challenge to the computerized loadmasters and the ground crew who had spent an hour meticulously planning the aircraft's balance. Sam knew it was baseless. The 777's sophisticated fly-by-wire system could handle minute imbalances far beyond a pilot's physical perception. Thorne's feeling was an anachronism, a ghost from an era of purely manual flight. "What do you suggest, Captain?" Sam asked cautiously. "We need to remove some weight from the front. Specifically from the cabin," Thorne stated, his gaze unblinking. He tapped his finger on the passenger manifest on his screen. "We have a few non-revenue passengers, a couple of employees on standby. Let's bump them, and we'll need to ask one paying passenger from the forward cabin to volunteer for a later flight." Sam's unease sharpened into confusion. Bumping paying first-class passengers for a phantom feeling about weight was unheard of. It was a logistical nightmare and a customer service disaster. Captain, that's highly irregular. The gate agents won't— I am the captain of this aircraft, Thorne cut in, his voice hardening. My word is law. My primary responsibility is the safety of this flight. If I deem it unsafe, it does not move. Make the call to the gate. Tell them my decision. Reluctantly, Sam keyed his microphone. He relayed the captain's bizarre command to the operations manager, who responded with predictable disbelief. Over the radio, Sam could hear the frantic typing and muted arguments in the background. Back in seat 2A, Genevieve was looking at her watch. They were now 10 minutes past their scheduled departure time. A soft murmur of impatience was rippling through the cabin. Brenda, the flight attendant, approached her with an apologetic smile. Dr. Sterling, my apologies for the delay. The captain has indicated a slight weight and balance issue he's reviewing. Genevieve, who held a doctorate in aeronautical engineering and whose company designed the guidance systems for orbital rockets, raised an eyebrow. A weight and balance issue? On a 777, after the doors are closed? That's unusual. Yes, ma'am. Very, Brenda admitted, her professional mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Minutes later, a harried-looking gate agent, a young man named Philip, boarded the plane and walked directly to Genevieve's seat. Brenda followed, looking deeply uncomfortable. Dr. Sterling, Philip began, his voice trembling slightly. I am so sorry to have to ask this. We have, a slight technical issue with the aircraft's weight distribution. The captain has requested that we ask one passenger from this cabin to deplane and take a later flight. We can offer you an $800 travel voucher and a confirmed seat on the 1 p.m. flight. Genevieve stared at him, her mind processing the absurdity of the request. She glanced around. The first-class cabin was full. There were men in expensive suits, a woman with a child. Why her? Why me, specifically? She asked, her voice calm and level, a tool she had sharpened in countless boardrooms. Philip swallowed hard. The captain. He indicated a passenger in the forward-most seat would be the most effective for the balance shift. It was the flimsiest excuse she had ever heard. The difference in weight distribution between seat 1A and seat 8A was utterly negligible on a £500,000 aircraft. It was a lie, a poorly constructed one, at that. Let me be clear, Genevieve said, her voice dropping a register, gaining an edge of steel. You are telling me that the captain of this aircraft is holding this entire flight because he believes my presence, my specific weight in this specific seat, is rendering the plane unsafe to fly. That is the information we have been given, ma'am, Philip said miserably. Across the aisle, a man in a rumpled blazer who had been typing furiously on his laptop looked up. His name was David Finch, a well-known tech blogger with a massive online following. He discreetly angled his phone, its camera now recording the interaction. Genevieve unbuckled her seatbelt, but she didn't stand up to leave. She stood up to face the front of the plane. I would like to speak to the captain, she announced, her voice carrying through the now silent cabin. Brenda rushed forward. Ma'am, that's not possible. The cockpit door is sterile. The cockpit is sterile during taxi, takeoff, and landing, Genevieve corrected her, her aerospace knowledge showing. We are parked at the gate with the engines off. I am a passenger who has been accused of compromising the safety of this flight. I am going to speak to the man who made that accusation. Her resolve was absolute. This wasn't about an inconvenience or a travel voucher anymore. This was a direct, personal, and utterly baffling challenge. As she took a step toward the cockpit door, she felt the eyes of every passenger on her. She had no idea the man sitting behind that door had singled her out not for her weight, but for the color of her skin and the power she represented, a combination he simply refused to accept. The cockpit door remained closed. Genevieve stood before it, a pillar of composure in a sea of rising tension. Brenda, the lead flight attendant, was speaking in hushed, urgent tones into the interphone, her face a mask of professional panic. "Captain Thorne, the passenger in 2A is requesting to speak with you directly. She is refusing to deplane until she has." Thorne's voice crackled back, laced with irritation. "Tell her that's not an option. The cockpit is secure. Get her off my plane, Brenda. Now." "Sir, with all due respect, she's very insistent, and she seems to know the regulations. The other passengers are starting to get restless." "I don't care if the president is restless," Thorne snapped. "My authority is final. Remove her, or I'll call airport security and have her removed for interference with a flight crew." The threat was a sledgehammer. Brenda relayed the message to Genevieve, her voice barely a whisper. "Dr. Sterling, he's refusing. He says he'll call security." Genevieve's expression didn't change, but a cold fury began to solidify within her. This was no longer just an irrational decision. It was a flagrant abuse of power. The idea of being frog-marched off a plane for questioning a lie was insulting, but the underlying reason for the lie was what truly enraged her. She had faced subtle prejudice her entire career. The condescending questions in investor meetings, the surprised looks when she introduced herself as the lead engineer. But she had never encountered anything so blatant, so aggressively nonsensical. "Please inform the captain," Genevieve said, her voice precise and clear, loud enough for those in the nearby rows to hear, "that I am Dr. Genevieve Sterling, CEO of Ethereum Dynamics. My company manufactures the primary guidance processors and telemetry systems for this specific model of Boeing 777. I am intimately familiar with its operational parameters, including its maximum takeoff weight and center of gravity envelope." The excuse he has provided is not only technically baseless, it is a demonstrable falsehood. A collective gasp rippled through the front of the cabin. David Finch, the blogger, zoomed in with his phone. This was no longer just an airline dispute. It was a showdown between a pilot and an aerospace CEO. Inside the cockpit, Sam Peterson's blood ran cold. He looked at Thorne, whose face had turned a blotchy red. "Rick, did you hear that? She's from Ethereum. She builds parts for this plane. She knows you're lying." Thorne slammed his hand on the console. "She can be the Queen of England for all I care. I am the final authority on this aircraft's safety. She's making a scene. She's a disruptive passenger." "She's not being disruptive, Rick. She's being logical," Sam countered, his voice rising. "This is insane. Just let her stay on the plane. Whatever your issue is, it's not worth this. We're going to have a major incident report to file." "My issue," Thorne hissed, turning to face his first officer, his eyes narrowed into slits, "is that I will not be questioned by some affirmative action hire in a pantsuit who thinks her title gives her the right to command my cockpit. This is my domain." The venom in his voice, the undisguised bigotry, struck Sam like a physical blow. It wasn't about weight. It was never about weight. It was about a black woman in a position of immense power, and Thorne's fragile ego couldn't handle it. He had seen her board, seen her take the premier seat on his aircraft, and it had broken something inside him. Genevieve, sensing the stalemate, changed tactics. She turned to the gate agent, Philip. "Young man, what is your name?" "Philip, ma'am." "Philip, I want you to get your station manager on the phone. I also want you to call the Trans-American Corporate Duty Officer. Give them my name and tell them that the captain of Flight 82 is refusing to fly. Citing a safety concern he is unable or unwilling to substantiate, after specifically targeting a single, paying, first-class passenger for removal. She then turned back to the silent cabin. "I apologize to all of you for this delay," she said, her voice resonating with authority. "It appears the captain has a personal issue with my presence on his aircraft. Rest assured, I have no intention of deplaning. I will, however, be taking this matter up with the FAA and the Department of Transportation the moment I am back on the ground." The passengers, who had been murmuring in confusion, now began to understand. A man in 3B, a corporate lawyer, spoke up. "This is outrageous. I've never seen anything like it. We're all witnesses to this." David Finch stopped recording and stood up. "I'm a journalist," he announced, "and I can confirm the passenger in 2A has been nothing but calm and reasonable. The captain's demands are inexplicable." The cabin was now a tinderbox. The crew was in an impossible position, caught between an immovable passenger and an unhinged captain. Thorne, hearing the shift in the cabin's mood through the thin cockpit door, made his final, career-ending move. He got back on the interphone to Brenda. His voice was cold, stripped of all emotion. "Brenda, this is your final instruction. The aircraft is now returning to the gate. I am cancelling this flight, citing crew inability to secure the cabin and a disruptive passenger incident." A wave of groans and angry shouts erupted from the passengers. Cancelling a fully boarded transcontinental flight was a nuclear option. It would cost the airline hundreds of thousands of dollars and strand over 200 people. "Captain, please don't do this," Brenda pleaded. "It's done," Thorne said. He keyed the radio. "JFK ground, Trans-American 82. We are returning to gate C-34, cancelling the flight, requesting a tow." As the aircraft, which had pushed back a few feet, was slowly towed back to the jet bridge, Genevieve calmly sat back down in seat 2A. She didn't look defeated. She looked like she was preparing for war. She retrieved her phone, her fingers moving with lightning speed. She wasn't texting her investors to tell them she'd be late. She was pulling up a number she hadn't had to use in years. It was the direct line for the FAA's Eastern Region Operations Center. Thorne thought he had won. He had exerted his authority, removed the person who offended his worldview from his sky. He had drawn a line in the sand. He just didn't realize he was on the wrong side of it, and a tsunami of consequences was about to wash him away. The hum of the first-class lounge was a world away from the chaos unfolding back at gate C-34, while the other 248 passengers of the cancelled Flight 82 were being rebooked amidst a flurry of apologies and frantic keyboard clicks. Genevieve Sterling sat in a quiet corner, a tablet and a phone her only companions. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't demanded compensation, hadn't engaged with the shell-shocked airline representatives who offered her profuse apologies. Her mind was operating on a different plane entirely. This was no longer a customer service complaint. It was a matter of public safety and professional integrity. Her first call was to Olivia, her executive assistant, a woman known for her surgical efficiency. "Olivia, cancel the 11 a.m. presentation. Reschedule for tomorrow. Charter the company's Gulf Stream. I want it ready at Teterboro in 3 hours. File a formal corporate complaint with Trans-American's Executive Relations Department. Detail the events on Flight 82 precisely. Name Captain Richard Thorne, but that's just housekeeping. I'm handling the real problem." Her next call was the one that mattered. She dialed the number for the FAA's Eastern Region Operations Center. As a key executive in a major aerospace firm, she wasn't just another passenger. She was a known entity, a federal contractor whose work was integral to the aviation ecosystem. "This is Dr. Genevieve Sterling, CEO of Ethereum Dynamics," she began, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "I need to speak with the duty officer for air carrier operations. It is an urgent matter concerning a flight crew safety violation." She was patched through almost immediately to a man named Robert Chen, a veteran FAA investigator with a reputation for being meticulous and unflappable. Genevieve laid out the facts with the precision of an engineer. She didn't mention prejudice or discrimination. She knew those were legal matters for another time. Instead, she focused on the one thing the FAA cared about above all else: the flagrant misuse of a captain's safety authority. Mr. Chen, I was a passenger on Trans-American 82, JFK to SFO. The flight was cancelled at the gate by the pilot in command, Captain Richard Thorne. The reason cited to passengers was a weight and balance issue, which he claimed necessitated my removal from seat 2A. As you know, the displacement of a single passenger's weight is aerodynamically insignificant on a 777-200 ER. His claim was a pretext. On the other end of the line, Chen was listening intently, his pen scratching notes on a legal pad. A captain cancelling a flight over a single passenger was a massive red flag. He then escalated the situation, Genevieve continued, by refusing to communicate, threatening to involve security, and ultimately cancelling the flight, citing crew inability to secure the cabin. At no point was I disruptive. At no point did I refuse to comply with a lawful instruction from the flight crew. I did, however, refuse to deplane based on a demonstrably false safety claim. I have video of the entire incident, recorded by another passenger. Chen's interest piqued. Video evidence? Yes, and I can personally attest as an aeronautical engineer whose firm provides guidance systems to Boeing that no such weight and balance issue could have possibly existed under the circumstances described. This suggests one of two possibilities. Either Captain Thorne is grossly incompetent and doesn't understand the basic physics of the aircraft he is flying, which makes him a danger in the sky. Or he deliberately falsified a safety log entry to achieve a personal objective, which is a severe violation of federal aviation regulations. She let that sink in. She had framed the argument perfectly. It wasn't about her feelings. It was about Thorne's fitness to fly. She had presented the FAA with a binary choice. Either their licensed pilot was dangerously stupid, or he was dangerously malicious. Neither was acceptable. The greater concern, Mr. Chen, is the precedent. If a pilot can invent a safety issue to remove a passenger they simply do not like, the entire system of trust between the public and the flight crews is compromised. What if the pilot has a grudge against a federal air marshal? What if they object to a passenger for reasons of race, religion, or gender? The misuse of safety protocols as a weapon is a threat we cannot tolerate. Chen was silent for a moment. He had heard thousands of passenger complaints. Most were petty grievances about lost luggage or rude flight attendants. This was different. This was a credible high-level accusation of professional misconduct from an expert in the field. Dr. Sterling, where is the aircraft and crew now? The passengers have disembarked. I assume the crew is still with the aircraft at gate C-34, debriefing and filing their reports. Do not move, Chen said, his voice now devoid of any bureaucratic pleasantry. Stay in the lounge. I am dispatching a field investigation team to JFK immediately. We will interview the crew, secure the flight data recorder, and the cockpit voice recorder. Captain Thorne will not be flying any other aircraft until this investigation is complete. The finality in his tone was absolute. Genevieve had not called to complain. She had called to activate a system, and it had responded. She had provided the facts, the expertise, and the framework. The bureaucratic machinery of the FAA was now grinding into motion, and its full weight was about to descend upon Captain Richard Thorne. She ended the call and took a slow sip of her water. She looked out the vast window of the lounge at the planes taking off, ascending gracefully into the blue expanse. Thorne had tried to deny her a place in that sky. He had used his power to ground her, but he had severely underestimated hers. He controlled a single cockpit. She helped design the systems that made every cockpit work. His authority ended at the cabin door. Hers extended to the very regulations that granted him his license. The battle was over. The consequences were just beginning. Captain Richard Thorne strode from the jet bridge into the terminal with a swagger he didn't feel. He had won, he told himself. He had asserted his command. The sea of angry and inconvenienced passengers glaring at him from the gate area was just collateral damage. He held his head high, a martyr for the principle of a captain's ultimate authority. First Officer Sam Peterson followed a few paces behind, his face pale, his logbook clutched in his hand like a shield. Sam knew this was a catastrophe. Thorne was heading for the crew operations center to file his report, a carefully worded narrative about a disruptive passenger and an uncooperative crew that would justify his decision. He was already composing the sentences in his head, painting himself as the calm center of a storm he had created. He never made it. Two men in nondescript suits intercepted them before they reached the concourse exit. One was older, with the weary eyes of a career investigator. The other was younger, all sharp angles and focused intensity. "Captain Richard Thorne?" the older man asked. It wasn't a question. "Yes, who's asking?" Thorne bristled. "Robert Chen, Federal Aviation Administration," the man said, flashing his credentials. "This is Agent Davies. We need you and your first officer to come with us. Now." The color drained from Thorne's face. The FAA. "Here, all ready." It was impossibly fast. He had expected a letter, a formal inquiry in a week or two, not an ambush at the gate. "What is this about?" Thorne demanded, trying to project an aura of indignant command. "It's about the cancellation of Flight 82, Chen said, his voice flat. "We'll be conducting our interviews in the airport's administrative offices. Your airline has been notified. They're sending a union representative." Chen then looked at Sam. "First Officer Peterson, you'll be interviewed separately." The two pilots were escorted through a series of sterile, non-public corridors to a small, windowless conference room. Thorne was left with his union rep, a portly man named George, who looked deeply unhappy to be there. Sam was taken to an adjacent room. Thorne's interview began an hour later. He sat across a metal table from Chen and Davies. He launched into his prepared speech, a tale of nagging safety concerns and a passenger who undermined his authority. It was a gut feeling, a sense that the aircraft was nose-heavy, Thorne explained, trying to sound like a seasoned veteran, relying on his invaluable experience. The passenger in 2A, a Dr. Sterling, became belligerent when the crew attempted to follow my instructions to deplane her to rectify the balance. Chen listened without interruption, his face impassive. When Thorne finished, Chen slid a document across the table. "Captain, this is the final weight and balance sheet for Flight 82, signed by you and your loadmaster. According to this, your center of gravity was at 26.7% Mach. For a 777-200 ER, the forward limit is 18%. You weren't just within limits. You were comfortably in the middle of the acceptable range. You had a margin of error of several tons. Can you explain why you felt a 150-pound passenger would make a difference?" Thorne's jaw tightened. As I said, it was a feeling. Decades of flying gives you a sense for these things that computers can't replicate. So, your feeling supersedes the certified calculations from Boeing, your airline, and the data on this sheet which you yourself signed? Chen pressed. "In my cockpit, yes," Chen made a note. "And this passenger, Dr. Sterling, you claim she was belligerent. Can you describe her belligerent actions?" "She refused to deplane. She raised her voice. She incited the other passengers," Thorne lied, embellishing the story. "So she yelled? She threatened someone?" Davies, the younger agent, chimed in. "Her tone was threatening," Thorne insisted. "She was questioning my command. That is a threat to the safety of the flight." Chen slid another item across the table, a small tablet. He pressed play. The video recorded by David Finch filled the screen. It showed Genevieve, calm and articulate. It showed the gate agent, Philip, flustered and apologetic. It captured her clear, steady voice as she identified herself and dismantled Thorne's lie with surgical precision. It showed no yelling, no threats, no belligerence. It showed a professional woman refusing to be bullied by a baseless order. Thorne watched, his bravado evaporating. He stared at the screen, at the undeniable proof that he had just lied to a federal investigator. "This video, along with 20 other passenger statements we've already collected, tells a very different story, Captain," Chen said softly. "They describe you as being the one who was unreasonable. They describe Dr. Sterling as a model of composure." Chen leaned forward. "We are impounding the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. The CVR will have a recording of your conversation with your first officer prior to your call to the gate. I would advise you to think very carefully about what we might hear on that tape, Captain." The mention of the CVR was the final blow. Thorne's mind flashed back to his venomous rant to Sam about the affirmative action hire. It was all on tape. His career wasn't just in jeopardy, it was over. The proof was preserved on a magnetic strip, waiting to be played in a sterile government office. "Captain Thorne," Chen said, his voice now like chips of ice. "Pursuant to Title 49 of the Code of Federal Regulations, I am issuing an emergency order grounding you, effective immediately. You are to surrender your pilot's license and your medical certificate pending the outcome of this investigation." Thorne sat frozen, the words washing over him. Grounded. Surrender your license. It was the end of his world. The authority he had wielded with such arrogance was gone, stripped from him in a bland, windowless room. He had tried to remove one woman from his plane, and in doing so, he had removed himself from every plane. Forever. His kingdom of the sky had vanished, and all that was left was the silent, humming fluorescent lights of an interrogation room. The investigation moved with a speed that shocked the bureaucratic norms of the aviation world. Robert Chen understood that this case was not just about one pilot's misconduct. It was a test of the system's integrity. With Dr. Genevieve Sterling's name attached, a respected figure in the aerospace community, there was no room for error or delay. The centerpiece of the investigation was the cockpit voice recorder. In a soundproof room at the FAA's regional headquarters, Chen, Davies, and a union representative for the Airline Pilots Association sat as the audio from the last 30 minutes of Flight 82's time on the ground was played. First, there was the routine pre-flight chatter, the familiar rhythm of checklist responses. Then, a shift. Thorne's grunt, his baseless claim about the forward cargo, Sam Peterson's professional, logical refutations, and then the damning monologue. "I will not be questioned by some affirmative action hire in a pantsuit who thinks her title gives her the right to command my cockpit. This is my domain." The words hung in the sterile air of the listening room, raw and ugly. It was the smoking gun. It laid bare the entire motivation, stripping away the pretense of safety and revealing the core of raw prejudice beneath. The union representative, who had been prepared to mount a vigorous defense of a captain's authority, slowly sank back in his chair and put his face in his hands. There was no defense for this. Next came the interviews. Sam Peterson was first. The young first officer, free from the intimidating presence of his captain, recounted the events with meticulous, painful honesty. He described Thorne's demeanor, the irrationality of his claims, and the shock he felt upon hearing the captain's tirade. I have never, in all my training or my time flying the line, seen a captain so blatantly disregard procedure and invent a safety concern, Sam said, his voice steady. He was operating from a place of personal animosity, not professional judgment. I was preparing to formally challenge his decision and call for a second opinion from the chief pilot if he had insisted on taking off without Dr. Sterling. His testimony was devastating. It confirmed that even in the cockpit, Thorne's judgment was seen as compromised. Brenda Walsh, the lead flight attendant, was equally clear. She had worked for Transamerican for 25 years and had seen every kind of passenger and pilot. Her written statement was a masterclass in professional observation. Captain Thorne's orders were irregular from the start, she wrote. The request to remove a specific first-class passenger for weight and balance after door closure is, in my experience, unprecedented. Dr. Sterling remained calm and respectful throughout the entire exchange. She did not raise her voice or threaten any crew member. The captain's decision to cancel the flight was, in my opinion, a punitive measure against the passengers for his inability to remove Dr. Sterling from the aircraft without cause. Chen's team then began to dig into Thorne's history. They pulled his full training and service record. On the surface, it was exemplary. Thousands of flight hours, no accidents, consistent check ride passes. But beneath the surface, a pattern emerged. Over the last decade, there were half a dozen minor, informal complaints. A flight attendant who felt he'd been dismissive and used derogatory language. A gate agent who reported Thorne had been unnecessarily aggressive over a minor baggage issue. A co-pilot who noted in a post-flight debrief that Thorne made uncomfortable jokes. Individually, they were small incidents, written off as Thorne being old school or gruff. But when assembled by Chen's team, they painted a portrait of a man with a simmering resentment, a pilot who felt the world was changing around him and leaving him behind. A man who saw women and people of color in positions of authority not as colleagues, but as threats. Dr. Genevieve Sterling, a brilliant black woman and a CEO in his own industry, was the embodiment of everything he feared and resented. Her presence in Seat 2A of his airplane was a personal affront he simply couldn't tolerate. The technical case was just as damning. Boeing was contacted and provided a statement confirming that the removal of a single passenger could not and would not resolve any legitimate weight and balance issue on a 737. The ground crew supervisor confirmed the forward cargo pallet was standard and had been loaded correctly. Every piece of the puzzle, every witness, every scrap of data pointed to the same conclusion. Richard Thorne had lied. He had weaponized his authority, endangered the trust placed in pilots, and done it all to satisfy a petty, racist impulse. The file on Chen's desk grew thicker. It was a meticulous deconstruction of a man's career, an autopsy of a lie. There were no ambiguities, no grey areas. All that remained was the final, formal judgment. The certified letter arrived at Richard Thorne's sprawling suburban home 2 weeks after the incident. He had been living in a self-imposed exile, refusing to speak to the union, his former colleagues, or even his wife, Karen. He spent his days watching daytime television, the volume turned up loud to drown out the silence of a life that had suddenly lost its purpose. He tore open the envelope with trembling hands. The FAA letterhead was stark and official. The words were clinical, brutal, and final. After a thorough investigation into the events of September 6, 2025, concerning Transamerican Flight 82, the Federal Aviation Administration has found Captain Richard Thorne to be in gross violation of falsification of official aircraft logs, reckless and endangering conduct, willful interference with the duties of a flight crew, a demonstrated lack of care, judgment, and responsibility necessary for the holder of an airline transport pilot certificate. Therefore, pursuant to 49 U.S. Code, Basra 44709, this letter serves as a final order of emergency revocation of all airman certificates issued to Richard Thorne. This revocation is permanent. Permanent. The word echoed in the silent house. It wasn't a suspension, it wasn't a fine or a retraining order. It was a death sentence for his career. His wings, the core of his identity for 35 years, had been torn from him. The next letter arrived an hour later, this one by courier from Trans-American Airways. It was much shorter. It cited the FAA's findings and terminated his employment for cause, effective immediately. All retirement benefits, including his pension and flight privileges, were forfeited due to the nature of the dismissal. He was left with nothing. The story, which had been simmering on David Finch's popular tech blog, exploded into the mainstream media. Pilot grounds flight over refusal to fly with black CEO, the headline screamed. The article included Finch's video, which went viral. Trans-American stock dipped. The public outcry was deafening. The airline was forced into a full-page apology in every major newspaper, addressed directly to Dr. Genevieve Sterling, and announced a company-wide mandatory diversity and inclusion training program. The fallout reached his personal life that evening. His wife, Karen, who had only known his vague, self-pitying version of the story, confronted him in the living room, a tablet in her hand, displaying Finch's article. "I just got a call from the club," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "The board is asking you to resign your membership. They're saying your conduct doesn't reflect their values." "Rick, what is this?" "The article. The things they're saying." She looked at him, her husband of 28 years, and saw a stranger. "The video, Rick. The pilot they describe. Is that you? Did you really cancel a flight and ruin our lives because you couldn't stand to have a black woman sitting in first class?" Thorne couldn't meet her eyes. His blustering defenses, his claims of safety and authority, crumbled into dust under the weight of the truth. "You don't understand," he mumbled. "She was questioning me. The disrespect." "Disrespect?" Karen cried, her voice cracking. "You threw away 30 years of seniority, your pension, our future, because your pride was hurt. We're going to lose this house. Our friends won't even look at me." "For what? For some backwards, hateful idea you couldn't keep to yourself for a 5-hour flight?" The fight was the beginning of the end. The man she had married was a hero in a uniform, a respected commander of the skies. The man standing before her now was just a bitter, unemployed bigot, exposed for the world to see. The karma was absolute. Richard Thorne had built his entire identity around the power and prestige of being a captain. He saw himself as the ruler of a silver kingdom that soared above the petty squabbles of the world below. In a single, spiteful act, he had not only lost that kingdom, but had become a pariah in the very world he looked down upon. He was grounded, not just in the legal sense, but in a much more profound way. He was trapped on the earth, forced to live with the consequences of his own hatred, a man who had reached for the sun and found himself buried in the dirt. 3 weeks later, the soft chime for descent echoed through the cabin of a Gulfstream G650. Dr. Genevieve Sterling looked out the window as the jet began its smooth, sweeping turn over the San Francisco Bay. Below, the patchwork of the city glittered, a testament to innovation and forward momentum. The trip had been a resounding success. Her presentation, delivered a day later than planned, had secured a landmark 9-figure investment for Ethereum Dynamics' next-generation satellite constellation project, The investors hadn't just been impressed by her technology. Several had privately commended her for her handling of the incident on Flight 82. Her grace under pressure had become a legend in the circles that mattered. Olivia, her assistant, sat across from her, reviewing the schedule for their arrival. "The car is waiting on the tarmac, and I've confirmed your dinner with the Caltech board. The Transamerican CEO has called 3 more times, by the way. He's offering to fly to your office personally to apologize." Genevieve considered it for a moment. "Tell his office I appreciate the gesture, but it's not necessary. The best apology is the institutional change they've promised. That's what matters." She had no interest in personal vengeance. Seeing Richard Thorne's life crumble in the news had brought her no joy, only a grim sense of satisfaction that a broken part of the system had been fixed. Her goal had never been to ruin one man, but to protect the integrity of a system she loved and contributed to. A pilot's authority is a sacred trust given to them so they can protect their passengers. Thorne had treated that trust as a personal weapon, and for the safety of every future passenger, he had to be removed. It was as simple and as clinical as replacing a faulty component on a rocket engine. A flight attendant, a young, professional man, approached her. "Dr. Sterling, can I get you anything before we land? More coffee?" "No, thank you, Michael. I'm fine," she said with a warm smile. He paused. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, all of us in the industry have been following what happened. Thank you. You stood up for a lot of people, not just yourself." Genevieve was taken aback, but nodded graciously. "We all have a responsibility to ensure the skies are safe for everyone, in every sense of the word." As the Gulfstream's wheels touched down with a gentle puff of smoke, she felt a sense of closure. Richard Thorne had tried to use the sky as a barrier, a place to enforce his own antiquated, hateful hierarchy. He failed to understand that the sky doesn't belong to anyone. It's a space of limitless potential, a place where what matters isn't where you come from or what you look like, but how high you're willing to climb. He had tried to ground her, to keep her on the earth where he thought she belonged. But as she stepped off her private jet, ready to close a deal that would literally launch new stars into the heavens, Genevieve Sterling knew she had never stopped flying. 18 months had passed. The memory of the confrontation at JFK had softened from a sharp, ugly wound into a scar, a story that was told in boardrooms and training seminars, a modern fable about the perils of unchecked authority. For Genevieve, it was a closed chapter, a problem analyzed and solved. She was focused on the future, on the imminent launch of Ethereum's flagship reusable rocket, the Prometheus, a vehicle poised to revolutionize commercial spaceflight. She was in Chicago for a final series of meetings with the suppliers for the rocket's heat shielding. The trip back to San Francisco was on a commercial flight, a last-minute booking on Transamerican. She felt a brief, vestigial flicker of unease as she saw the airline's logo, but dismissed it. It was just an airline, a system, and systems, she knew, could be improved. As she walked down the jet bridge, she noticed the captain standing at the entrance to the aircraft, greeting passengers. It was a practice that had become more common at Transamerican in the last year, part of a corporate initiative to seem more personable, more accountable. He was young, with a kind, open face. As Genevieve handed him her boarding pass for seat 2A, he looked at her, then at the name on the ticket, and his eyes widened in recognition. "Dr. Sterling," he said, his voice filled with a genuine respect that was unmistakable. "It's an honor to have you with us today. I'm Captain Peterson. Sam Peterson." Genevieve paused, her mind instantly retrieving the name from the FAA reports she had been sent as a courtesy. This was Thorne's first officer, the young man who had been in the cockpit that day, who had tried to reason with his superior, whose testimony had been so crucial. He looked different now. The uncertainty in his eyes was gone, replaced with the quiet confidence of command. The 4 stripes on his epaulets were new, but they suited him. "Captain Peterson," Genevieve replied, a sincere smile spreading across her face as she extended her hand. "It's a genuine pleasure to meet you properly. Congratulations on your command." "Thank you, ma'am," he said, his handshake firm. I owe it, in large part, to you." He glanced back at the line of boarding passengers, then lowered his voice slightly. "What happened that day? It sent a shockwave through the whole company. For years there was this unspoken rule about not questioning the old guard. A lot of us younger pilots knew some of their attitudes were wrong, dangerous even, but it was hard to speak up. You didn't just stand up for yourself, Dr. Sterling. You forced a conversation that this airline desperately needed to have," he continued, the words coming out in a rush, as if he'd been waiting a year and a half to say them. After the investigation, they launched the Thorn Protocols. That's what everyone calls them internally. It's a complete overhaul of conflict resolution and command authority training. They made my testimony, and Brenda Walsh's, the lead flight attendant, the core of the new curriculum. They started looking for pilots with good judgment and interpersonal skills, not just good stick and rudder men. They fast-tracked my upgrade. They made Brenda a supervisor for in-flight training. Your actions changed the culture here. It's still not perfect, but it's better. Safer. Genevieve was profoundly moved. She had seen the public fallout, the corporate apologies, the headlines, but this was the real result. This was the quiet, internal shift that truly mattered. It wasn't just about punishing one bad actor. It was about elevating the good ones who had been silenced by the old system. "I'm glad to hear that, Captain," she said. "Integrity is just as critical to flight safety as any avionics system. It seems Transamerican has a very capable one at the controls today." Sam Peterson simply beamed, a look of pure, unadulterated pride on his face. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Sterling. We'll make sure you have a smooth flight." As Genevieve settled into her seat, the same one she had occupied on that fateful day, it felt different. It was no longer a scene of conflict, but a place of quiet triumph. A few minutes later, the captain's voice came over the PA system, calm, clear, and reassuring. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain, Sam Peterson, speaking. On behalf of our entire crew, it's my pleasure to welcome you aboard Transamerican, Flight 415, with non-stop service to San Francisco." Genevieve leaned her head back and closed her eyes, not with the weariness of a CEO between meetings, but with a deep sense of peace. The low hum of the engines was a comforting sound. Richard Thorne had seen the cockpit as his personal kingdom, a throne from which to pass judgment. Sam Peterson saw it as a responsibility, a trust placed in him by every soul on board. The plane accelerated down the runway, powerful and true, and lifted gracefully into the vast, open sky. It was a sky that belonged to no one, and therefore to everyone. And it was now, Genevieve knew, just a little bit safer. This wasn't just a story about a flight. It was a testament to what happens when deep-seated prejudice collides with unshakable resolve and expertise. Dr. Genevieve Sterling didn't just win an argument. She defended a fundamental principle, that authority, especially in matters of public safety, must be wielded with integrity, not bigotry. The hard karma that found Captain Thorne wasn't magical. It was the logical, crushing outcome of a system being forced to correct itself. It's a powerful reminder that in our modern world, the cockpit of an airplane, the corner office, or any seat of power is no longer shielded from accountability. The truth, amplified by technology and integrity, will always find a way to be heard. If this story of justice served resonated with you, hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that competence and character will always triumph. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you never miss another story like this. What would you have done in her shoes? Let us know in the comments below.